Welcome to Utah Agile's meetup tonight, here with Melissa Boggs. We're really excited for you to be here. I miss these in person. I bet you all do too. We expect a few more people to come, but we'll get started so we have as much time to do what we came here to do tonight. So just by way of introduction, my name is Steve Ostermiller. I'm the director of Utah Agile. We started this about 8 years ago, and we've grown to over 2,000 people. The pandemic helped us grow even worldwide. We got people joining us from Africa whenever we do stuff virtually. So it's really fun. And this is what we do. We try to get ourselves together and talk about these things that matter to us in the work that we're doing, try to improving our organizations and careers and everything. So Silicon Slopes is a great partner for us. We're the Agile chapter with them. So we love that they give us this space to use. So we'll just watch and take care of it tonight, make sure we put everything back the way it was. We're also a Scrum Alliance user group, an Agile Alliance community group. And we always like to acknowledge, and Scrum.org. We are a Scrum.org community group as well. And we also always like to thank Veracity. Veracity is a local consulting firm, but they gave us our identity a few years ago. They gave us the domain names that they had been parked on for a while. So we are at utahagile.org, and we acknowledge their generosity all the time. So I'll just quickly introduce our speaker tonight. We'll let her take the stage, and we'll go from there. So Melissa Boggs is here from, now is it actually Denver? It's outside Denver. Yeah, so came over the mountains to us. And Melissa's a keynote speaker. She's an executive coach, has been in this space for years, and is a certified enterprise coach with the Scrum Alliance, and there are a few others of those coaching designations. She knows her stuff. She's been doing this a while, helping organizations and leaders make these changes. She's also the former co-CEO of Scrum Alliance, which, by the way, was my favorite time with Scrum Alliance. That was good times. I miss those times when you and Howard were leading that. So she is, she knows what she's doing at that executive level. It's what? And she has red hair. So that gets things done. She's also a host a podcast. I've been listening to it lately. Good stuff there. Wild Hearts at Work is what it's called. So look it up wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe we'll hear more about that as we go. There's more, I'm sure, but really what you came to learn about is some of these leadership topics that we're going to be exploring. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Melissa. Go ahead and take the stage. Thanks.
Awesome. Hello. This is so fancy, y'all. Thank you. I feel like I'm on TV, which technically I am. I think they're recording, so bear with me. Am I having a good hair day? Yikes. But hello, thank you for coming tonight. I know it's a quick getting here after work kind of situation, but I was thrilled to come. This is the first time I've been to Utah in, I don't know, probably 25 years, if I'm being honest. I grew up in Alaska, and we actually used to drive from Alaska to Texas every single summer. And to mix it up, my parents would come up with all kinds of different routes that we could take. So I do remember coming through Salt Lake. I was probably this big. But that is not what you come here to see or hear about. So we're going to talk tonight about getting your leaders to listen. The prompt that Steve gave me when he asked me to come and do this was, how do we get leaders to listen about Agile when they don't really know anything about software development in the first place? And so have that a little bit as your anchor, but I think I might surprise you with the take that I took on that question. All right, so first question, how many of you traveled during the holidays, this past holidays? One, okay. How many of you flew Southwest when you traveled during the holidays? No, you're so lucky. But you also just stole my joke, because I was going to say, well, I'm glad you made it home eventually. So I want to talk really quickly about the Southwest Airlines meltdown. So I actually know a number of Agile coaches who do amazing work at Southwest. So things happen, this happened, there is some awesome Agile work going on there, But obviously, in front of the entire world, they just imploded, over the holidays. And right after that, or really in the midst of it, the Southwest Airlines Pilots Association issued a letter, an open letter to the world, but specifically kind of aimed at the CEO. And this is more words than I would ever want on a slide, so I'm going to recap some of it for you. But essentially, we told you so. The sentiment of the letter was that the pilots, the crew, staff at Southwest, everyone had been telling the CEO for quite some time that their IT systems were antiquated, their processes were antiquated, and they were basically in for a meltdown, which is exactly what happened. And so when you read this letter, you start to feel a lot of sympathy for these folks who sat there time after time after time trying to get the attention of their leader, trying to tell him like, hey, this is coming. This is coming. And it's not just the CEO. There's probably like 16 layers of people, even just to get to the CEO. But I think this is an interesting story to have us think about really quick. So if you were one of those folks who worked at Southwest prior to the meltdown, what is it that you would have said to that leader, let's say the actual CEO, if you ran into him in the hallway and you needed to get his attention and say, hey, this is a problem. Everyone's been telling you that this is a problem. What would you say to him? So I actually want you to stop for a moment and pair up with folks near you. And just have a quick chat and do a little bit of role playing, if you will. We'll just give it 5-6 minutes or so. What would you say to that person? What would your pitch be to tell them that our systems need to be updated or we're in trouble? And go. I just wondered if it still worked, since pre-pandemic. So there's this kind of universal Agile signal. If you are in groups and I raise my hand and you see me, then also raise your hand and finish your sentence. It's really funny in huge groups because I am this tall and this is the only thing that works for me to get people's attention. All right, so you've met them in the hallway, you make a pitch to them, and 9 times out of 10, that's nice. Yeah, okay. And they move on, right? And it's super frustrating. I want you to pin that for a moment. Pin that in your brain, because now I want to tell you a story. So first, think back to the most challenging leader that you have worked with. And I actually want you to write their name down on a Post-it note in front of you. And if you know each other's leaders, you can hide them if you're trying to protect the innocent or not so innocent. But I want you to write their name down and put it in front of you. We're going to have lots of Post-it notes and other things on your desk, so just be aware that you're going to need a clear space at some point. Okay, I think most of you have your names written down. You may find this hard to believe, but I was that leader. I was some coach's most challenging leader. So let me tell you a little story. As Steve mentioned, I had the privilege for 2 years of being the co-CEO of Scrum Alliance. It was the most challenging and rewarding 2 years of my life. I wouldn't change it for the world, but it was incredibly hard sometimes. And early on, in my tenure there, we did a major reorganization. If you want to hear more about that later, ask me. It was so much fun eventually, but it was really hard in the moment. So essentially what we did is we reorganized into persona-based cross-functional teams. And we did it through a dynamic reteaming exercise that allowed people to select their own team. So over the course of 3 days, we went through all these activities, and it was intended to be really fun and exciting, and it wasn't. And that was incredibly frustrating for me. So about halfway through this 3-day workshop, I am in a room with 3 other coaches who we had hired to help us through this reorganization. 2 of which, by the way, were very close friends of mine. And everyone in the organization is upset, frustrated, scared, worried. This thing that I hoped was going to be, this exciting thing was creating insecurity in them. Like, what if I pick the wrong team? Or, what if I don't like where I go? How do I get out of it? And so I'm sitting in my office with these 3 coaches, and my head is in my hands, literally. I'm not going to do that right now because it'll mess up the mic, but I am literally like this. So frustrated and so upset. And the coaches kept saying things like, well, you just have to do this. Oh, just do this. Just do this. And finally, at one point, I looked up at the 3 of them and said, excuse me, this is a lot harder for me than it is for you. And in that moment, it was literally like the sun shone down from the heavens, everything split apart, and I had an incredible epiphany because I had been them time after time after time. I had been sitting with a leader and saying, oh, just do this. Oh, it's so easy. Just do this. Having no idea the incredible burden that leader bore in that moment. Now, I'm not saying like, oh, woe is me, I'm a CEO. But I do think that there's some things that we don't quite understand if we haven't been in those shoes. And I didn't until I was there. So many things that seemed really simple outside of the bubble were not simple to me because I was bearing the judgment and opinion of all the employees, all of our customers who were the members of Scrum Alliance. There were so many things going on with me, but they couldn't see that. And so my behavior was just like lashing out, which honestly, that's not how I usually am. I think they were a little bit taken aback, like, oh, what's wrong with her? So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the workshop, because what I want you to start to do is put yourself in the shoes of the leaders that we're talking about. That was a slide from 2 minutes ago. All right, so the type of work that we do for the most part, if you are in an Agile team, whether you're a Scrum Master, developer, product owner, is catalyzing transformation. Whether that transformation is in product, like changing a product, or in the ways that you work in your organization, more often than not, we're trying to catalyze something. So grab a Post-it note, and I want you to write down, right now in your work situation, what needs to change in 5 words or less. This is something very, very quick, just so you can think back to it. And if there's not something specific right now in this moment, then you can reach back to the last time there was something big that you needed to change. So 5 words or less, what needs to change? So you realize that something needs to change. And in whatever role that you're in, this references coaching, but it doesn't have to be coaching. You recognize, though, that it takes a village. There's not very many instances where a single person is able to catalyze that kind of transformation. And often, there is a specific person that you need in order to help catalyze that transformation. Usually, in a hierarchical organization, it's some sort of leader, whether it's your boss or maybe it's someone else who can sponsor what it is that you're trying to transform. I would like you to write their name down and put it next to the thing that needs to change. And if there's more than one person, if there's like 5 people, you can just pick one, because we're going to spend some time with that person tonight. Also, probably should be someone that you want to spend some time with. So here's what I hear happen quite a bit. There's this blame game that happens. In this particular example, it's sort of between like an Agile coach and a leader, but the same thing can happen between development teams and their leaders. there's a lot of blaming going on. Sometimes it's very pointed and direct, and sometimes it's just really subtle. Sometimes it's just in your head. But even when it's just in your head, it's influencing how you are interacting with that person and your ability to get them to listen. And so if you have said or heard any of these things in the last, or something like them in the last 6 months, can you raise your hand for me? Oh, Lordy. All right. And I wonder, how helpful were these things? Whether you were the one that said them or you were the one that heard them and were reacting accordingly. That was a rhetorical question, of course. It wasn't helpful. The thing is, like we established a couple minutes ago, we need each other. Teams need leaders, not because teams can't self-manage, by the way, but because generally the way that organizations are set up, we're hierarchical, and that's the system that we're in. So there's limits to what we can do in teams quite often if we're not able to connect with leaders and get them to understand what it is that we need. And so we need each other. So for the next little while, like I said, I'm going to invite you to step into the shoes of that person who is sitting on your desk. I'm going to share a couple of letters that came in today from your person. They just came in the mail while I was on the airplane from your person. So, dearest Agilist, here are 3 things that I wish you knew. Every decision, even the ones that seem really simple, is laden with nuance and with complexity. So when I was sitting in that moment with those coaches and they kept saying, just do this and just do this, there were 6 different things that were going through my head. Things that I was responsible for, people I didn't want to let down. Every single decision has complexity. And so for a moment, I want you to look at that Post-it note and think about what kind of complexity might be surrounding this change that might seem simple. Or even if it doesn't, the complexity for you is different than the complexity for them. Their level of responsibility. Dear Agilist, my authority is not unlimited. This one was probably the biggest wake-up call, if I'm just being really honest. This was my first time being a CEO. I didn't get to do just whatever I wanted. Obviously, I didn't think that was true, but there were lots of times when folks on my team would come to me and want to do something, and it would be an incredibly good idea, but I didn't have the budget for it, or I didn't have the support from the board. There were so many different things that tied my hands that were invisible to everyone else. And so even a CEO does not have unlimited authority. And if you talk about leaders that are, mixed in further in the hierarchy, they're even more limited, have even more constraints on what they can and can't do. So for a moment, again, look at your Post-it note and think about what the limits of their authority might be, whether that limit is implicit or explicit. So things like budget that's an explicit limit to authority, right? Here's the amount of money that the board says that you can have, but there are other implicit limits to authority as well. Things like social and political influences that would prevent someone from doing something even if they thought it was a good idea. So look at your Post-it and think about that for a sec. Dear Agilist, there is a fear factor, an immense responsibility to get things right. And the thing is, leaders don't always want to admit that. Like, not every leader is going to be vulnerable enough to admit that they're afraid. But you've seen it. I mean, you can see when fear is what is preventing them from moving forward. But that fear isn't just ego sometimes. Sometimes it's a sense of responsibility. Yes, I want to try that experiment, but what if it goes wrong? what does that mean, not just for me as the leader, but what does that mean for everyone else on my team? I was working with a team recently that we were in a strategic planning, and two of the highest leaders in the org were having an argument about what the revenue goals should be for the year. And there were a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainties. So there was part of it that was a little bit of just like throwing a dart, right? Within this range, we're just throwing a dart. And one of the leaders was saying, I don't want to set the goal too high. We're working with the compensation model. We want it to be achievable. We don't want to hit morale. But the other leader said, we've had this incredible growth year after year, even through the pandemic. If we set the bar too low, what message is that going to send? Is that going to send the message that we don't believe in them, or that we're worried about, not continuing to be as successful as we have been? And that's just an example of how nuanced some of these fears can be. And again, they can be almost invisible to everyone else. So when you've got people saying, well, just do this, and they've got a lot going on in their brain. How many of you have done an empathy map for like users? Awesome. How many of you have empathy mapped your boss? No hands? No one's been like, yeah, I did an empathy map on my boss. I don't think there's a better way to actually like dig in deep and think about what it is that your leader is dealing with in pursuit of being able to speak with them about the things that you need than to do an empathy map. So for the next little while, that's what we're going to do. Steven, can you help me pass these out real quick? I guess we could just hand a chunk out. I wasn't supposed to leave the carpet. Sorry. All right, so credit to Dave Gray. By the way, Dave Gray is the one who created the empathy map and the empathy map canvas. So I did not create this, but I have used it. It's really helpful. I mean, it was intended, frankly, for products. It was intended to kind of like help you get into the mindset of your users. But in this situation, your leader kind of is your end user. They are the person that you want to understand the most so that you can have a conversation with them. So we're going to take this one step at a time. This is definitely going to be like a working session for the next little while. We're going to focus on the leader that you identified a couple minutes ago as it pertains to the change that you identified. And we're just going to take it one step at a time. So, step number one, who are we empathizing with? So who is it? You already have their name, but this is asking a little bit about like, what is the situation that they're in? You might put things like their title. You might put things like, they're a vice president with 16 direct reports. This is all very kind of high level stuff because we're going to get deeper into like what they're thinking and stuff, but just briefly kind of write down, who is it that we are empathizing with? All right, if you're still writing on number one, that is okay. We're going to move to number two, but you can keep writing until you're finished. For number two, what do they need to do? And by this we mean outside of the change that we're talking about. Like what do they need to do just in general? What is their job? What jobs do they need to get done? What is their focus? What is their focus in terms of the things that they need to do? And if it helps, because this is a person, maybe think about like this quarter. And you may not know their specific like individual goals, but you can zoom out and kind of say, well, you know, I know that they need to get this project across the finish line or whatnot. So what do they need to do? If you're ready, you can, some of you are ready. So if you are, go ahead and move on to number 3. What do they see? Now, on the map, it's talking about the marketplace. I would actually think about the workplace. So who is it that they are in meetings with? What are the things that they are seeing happen in other areas of the organization? This job that they need to get done, these problems that they're trying to solve, how are other people solving them? In the org, in other companies that they might be aware of. And again, we're anchoring back to what they are seeing. All right, just checking in. Have we mostly gotten to meet everyone's people for the most part? Okay. Quick temp check. Is this helpful so far? Okay, because it's a lengthy process. We're only halfway through our map. But I do hear some like really cool like, oh, aha moments. So we're going to go on to number 4. What do they say? As much as possible, these should be actual quotes that you have heard this person say. And it doesn't actually always have to do exactly with this particular topic. If you constantly hear them say things like, I'm so tired, or my baby kept me up late last night, that's pertinent too. So what are some direct quotes? What are some things that you have actually heard them say? All right, once you've gotten what do they say, you can move on to what do they do? And this one could be mannerisms. So this one's definitely not talking about like what is their job. This is more like what are their behaviors? Do they shut down in meetings when they get overwhelmed? Do they stomp out of meetings? Do you see them chewing their nails a lot? Those are not the only things, but those are some things you might capture. What are some actual behaviors you've seen from them? I also like the last line. It says, what can you imagine them doing? So even if you haven't seen them do it, this is horrible, but like if you could imagine them like kicking at their dog, not kicking their dog, but kicking at their dog when they walk in the door. Or hugging and kissing their spouse when they get home. All right, and then our last one for now, we will get to the center one, but the last one for now, what do they hear? So this one might be a little bit related to like what do they see? If they're seeing certain people in the same meetings, what are those people saying? What are they hearing from people at work? What are they hearing from people at home? What are they hearing from maybe their version of a meetup? What meetup are they going to and hearing things from? If you're at, say, a startup, your CEO might be going to like an entrepreneur group. What is it that they're hearing and from whom? All right. So this is to me the most fun part of the whole entire map. So now we're going to look at the middle, which is what do they think and feel? And it's kind of it's new questions, but you can let your answers to the rest of the questions sort of influence how you're thinking about these questions in the middle. So I'm going to let you do the whole thing at once. So I'm going to go over all of them really quick. We're looking at their pains. So what are their current thorns in their sides? What is it that is getting in the way of some of the things that they wanted to do? What are some of their barriers, their pains? What are some of their gains? Some of their needs, their wants, their hopes, their dreams, beyond just like the project that you put on the outside. This might be they want a promotion. They want to have their team so stable that they could go on vacation to Fiji for 3 weeks and everything would be fine. There could be all kinds of things that are their gains on that right-hand side. And then at the bottom, it's really kind of the question that is bringing together everything in the whole map, right? What are the things that are motivating them and causing them to think certain ways about certain things? So pains, gains, motivations, thoughts, feelings that are motivating that behavior. So we'll take a couple minutes on that. All right, I'm going to give you a little more instruction. If you're not done with that part yet, that is okay. You'll have time to finish it up. So now what I want you to do after your map is finished, first of all, a round of applause to you, because that was a lot. And also, I wouldn't take that to work with you, because if your leader saw that, they might really think you're creepy. But what I want you to do now is I want you to zoom out. I want you to look again at your Post-it note about the change that you're trying to catalyze. And I want you to now look at this leader like they're a human being. And that's not to say that you were dehumanizing them before, but you just spent a lot of time thinking about who they are, what they might be thinking, what's getting in their way. And now think about that change through this new lens that you have. So when Steve brought this to me and brought the prompt to me and said, how do I talk to leaders about Agile when they don't know anything about software development? My answer is actually you don't. You talk to the leader about what problems that they have and how what you can bring to the table might help them solve those problems or meet those goals. I didn't want to come here and talk about Agile because most of you here probably can talk about Agile all day long. But the way that we reach them isn't by talking about Agile. The way that we reach them is by understanding where they're coming from and what they need, and then offering solutions. So what I want you to do now, and we're going to put on some easy listening, because we're going to take a good, I'd say 6 or 7 minutes to look at your change, look at your map, and create a new elevator pitch. Think about what you said before and think about how you might say it differently now. Any questions? You can write it on Post-its if you want, on a notebook, or just have it in your head. You are going to share it with your other folks, so whatever you need to be able to share it. Okay, we'll put 7 minutes on the clock. All right. We're going to start to wind this down. Hopefully you've had a chance to talk a little bit about your new elevator pitch. So the couple takeaways that I want you to take with you. Don't play the blame game, even in your own head. Because when you do that, it colors your perspective, it colors your lens, and the way that you're thinking about how you're communicating with those folks. If you are like, why aren't you listening? Just do it this way. There's no way you're going to be able to empathize and understand how to talk to them. Continuously offer empathy to this leader that you're partnered with, even when you don't want to, even when it's hard. Because again, when you're not able to do that, you're not going to be able to communicate effectively. You're going to be centered on what you need and what you want, when generally there's probably going to be a way that you can understand what they want and help find a solution for that also helps you get what you want. It's like negotiating 101. Holding both of the perspectives, so the perspective of the leader and your own perspective in your head, even when those things are conflicting. I'm sure that there are some of the things that you wrote down on your map that you were like, either they're wrong, they have a wrong perception, or they're in direct conflict with how I feel or what I want. When you can hold both of them in your head at the same time and offer empathy to them and yourself, then you're much more likely to find a way through, right? It makes you better. It also makes you in a better position to have those kind of conversations. And then lastly, use your map use your elevator pitch, and I encourage you to go have a conversation with your leader. Now, it may not be the conversation that you wrote down. One of the things that I've seen happen with this is that people realize they don't know their leader well enough. I can't answer some of these questions. If you are coming to someone and asking them to significantly change the way that they work, you should know them relatively well. If you are asking them to upend departmental processes, you should be able to answer at least some of these questions. So it may be that you come away from this going, yeah, I just need to go and have a coffee with them once a month or something, and so I can better understand what's going on with them and what are their pains and their gains. So I encourage you to take these, go have that conversation. Once again, this is Dave Gray's empathy map. You can find it really easily by Googling empathy map canvas. It is super useful for products too, but turns out it's kind of helpful for people as well. Thank you so much. This was a bit of a long one, and I really appreciate you sticking with me through it, and I hope it was helpful. So this is my QR code. I would be deeply appreciative if you would be willing to go and just give me a few bits of feedback. I am doing more and more of these all the time, and it would be helpful to know if this helped you and if it would help anyone else that you know. So with that, thank you, Steve, for having me. Thank you, Silicon Slopes, and all of you for hanging. Thanks. So are there any questions? So the question is that moment with the coaches early on in that first story that I told. What was the turning point? How did that shape how I work with leaders? That was one of the most instantaneous turning points in my career. I mean, truly, because I was already an enterprise coach before I was in that role. For probably 4 or 5 years at that point, I had been working with CEOs and VPs and directors. And I'm not saying that I pointed the finger at them and I was like, just do it. But that was my attitude, if I'm being honest. If I'm being really raw and honest, just do it. It's the best thing for everyone. Everyone's going to be better off. That's what was in the back of my head. And with the best of intentions, right? I mean, I didn't want anything but the best for everyone. But I had never been in those shoes, not to that degree. And so, again, it was like a lightning bolt. And these were incredibly good coaches that I still adore, great friends of mine, that in that moment, anytime you're using the word just, check yourself. Just do this, just do that. I even do it with my kids. I'm like, just unload the dishwasher. It'll only take 3 minutes. But it's really minimizing. It's a really minimizing word, right? It's minimizing the effort that something takes, the fears that you might have. I don't know what it's minimizing in my kids' case, but something. So yeah, that was a really instantaneous moment because it was almost like I stepped outside of myself. Because there was part of me that was like, don't you guys understand? And then there was the other part of me that was like, oh, well, maybe they don't, because I didn't prior to that moment. And so it has shaped, I never use the word just anymore. And yeah, it's just when I work with leaders now, I spend a lot less time trying to convince them, and I spend a lot more time trying to understand them. And then present solutions if I have them, or help them find solutions that they might have for themselves. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Ooh, that's a great question. So any tips on working with remote teams and building those types of relationships when you are remote? The short and simple answer is intention, and I know that sounds very woo-woo, but I sometimes in that situation will just directly say, I would like to build more of a relationship with you. I would like to understand what it is that you're dealing with. I tend to be that way. Like I tend to just like say the thing. It's not always great, but most of the time it is. And when you can just say that to them and say, can we have like a bi-weekly coffee or happy hour where we just hang? And maybe you have to do that starting in a group. Maybe you don't know them well at all and you kind of start in a group. Now, I do want to say we don't want to do that in an effort to manipulate. We do want to actually want to know what's going on with them. But yeah, I think I would, in that situation, literally just say, how would you feel about spending some more time on Zoom? Everybody wants that. Um, just so I can better understand and help you better from my role, depending on what your role is. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you.